My name is Scott Warner. I'm president of the Culinary Historians of Chicago. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We've got the Smothers brothers of the chef world tonight, John and Tony, or Tom and Dickie, but you're going to get a load of their wonderful act. We began our programs began almost 31 years ago, and we're continuing with some really wonderful people tonight. We have tonight two of Chicago's most iconic chefs, John Hogan and Tony Mantuano, who frequently, they're like brothers. They frequently talk together, and we're lucky enough to snare the two of them tonight. They're going to talk about Chicago's food history, their illustrious history, including cooking at the White House, just an amazing history of food for them. A little bit about Chef John Hogan. He began his career in 1979, learning French cuisine at some of Chicago's finest restaurants. And he worked for Chef Jean Joho at the four-star Everest in Chicago. And Chef Joho took John under his wing and groomed him to run the kitchen. And later, Chef Joho recommended Hogan to Kiki's Bistro, to Mr. Kiki himself, where he spent many years developing his style of French food. And again, Kiki's Bistro is one of the top restaurants in Chicago. Then anyway, he's done so many things. He opened his own French restaurant, Savarin, and Chicago Tribune named him as one of the top 10 chefs in Chicago. And he's joined Glenn Keefer later, well-known Chicago steakhouse legend, and opened Keefer's. Many of us have eaten there on Dearborn Street. And then he's also with his friend Tony Mantuano. Together, they created the idea of an English-style roast house, river roast on the Chicago River. It's a huge, wonderful place. It's still there. And he was named Chef of the Year in 2018 and inducted into the Chicago Chef Hall of Fame. And currently, he's pursuing his vision for the production and distribution of charcuterie, as well as a blues-based television show. He's done everything. Pardon me, there's a cat yowling in the background. And now to Chef Tony Mantuano. He's credited as being among the first to bring fine Italian dining to Chicago at Spiaggia, one of the country's most decorated Italian restaurants. One of his biggest clients was President Obama, who had invited him to the White House to cook, but he'll talk about that. And he's received many nominations from the James Beard Foundation. He's gotten Best Chef in the Midwest, and on and on and on. He's at an Italian restaurant in Nashville that was voted the #1 restaurant in America by Food and Wine readers. And he's living in New York now. And he's also the co-author of Wine Bar Food, a celebration of the Mediterranean. What haven't these two guys done? And they're going to give you a little glimpse of what they've done and what they've experienced tonight. Thank you, Chef John and Chef Tony. Take it away.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So Tony and I have been running around together since we met 1990 officially. We probably met prior to that, but we opened restaurants about 8 blocks from each other. And as Tony always likes to say, my clientele would go to bed at 9 o'clock and I'd go down and drink tequila with Tony at some point. So here we are. Hello.
Yeah, and I think the other crazy thing about how our paths cross, and this one we didn't even know about it, but we were both young cooks in Europe in 1983, 84. And we were both, staging. And, John, you can testify to this. There were not many Americans staging in European fine dining kitchens at the time. In Italy, very, very few, maybe 2 or 3 that I knew of. And in France, you probably had a little bit more because, everyone wanted to learn from Verger, etc. So, so yeah, we were both there at the same time. Didn't know it. Later, as we became friends, we knew we have very similar paths. Like so important for people to see what is out there, right? Like, what are these cuisines that really sort of turn you on before you start to develop your own style? And there's no better way to do that than to visit their homeland.
Right. I agree.
So, I took a few notes, John. How about yourself?
Mental notes, which is not easy getting in there, but yeah, I've got a
Well,
few. Go
it's
ahead. Why don't you fire away and I'll elaborate.
so when Spiaggia opened in 1984 on Michigan Avenue and Oak Street, it was a riot. I mean, it was a crazy time, and in America, like, just the amount of celebrities that we would get from all over the world. At some point, when they would stop into Chicago for whatever reason, they would always choose to dine at Spiaggia. And I think my favorite person to interact with and to create a vegetarian tasting menu with was Sir Paul McCartney. And he dined, and he's like, trying to figure out a menu for him because we didn't have a set. It was actually a vegan menu, and so I just went and talked to the table. It's like, so what do you guys like? He was there with his then wife, who's don't remember her name, but they're
Linda.
like, well, we no, it was not Linda. It was after Linda. Um,
Oh, they're Linda. Okay.
so yeah, we like porcini mushrooms. We like arugula. We like this stuff and we created a Paul McCartney tasting menu that we kept on the menu for quite some time after he left. But the amazing thing about this guy, here's a Beatle. Like, he walked up to the kitchen after dinner and shaked every one of the cook's hands and told them how what a great meal he had. And that was cool. We enjoyed that a lot. That's one of the highlights.
Excellent.
Actually, I
Well,
keep going. Just jump in, Hogue, anytime.
yeah, I mean, celebrities, I was never exposed to a ton, mostly Chicago celebrities and some culinary celebrities from maybe around the world, but it wasn't like Spiaggia where it was, at a level that people would come in from Europe, from Asia, and they'd want to eat at Spiaggia because it was the greatest Italian restaurant in Chicago for sure at the time.
One funny story about do you remember Cardinal Bernardin?
Oh yeah.
So he was dining there one night, and he was somewhat of a regular, couple, 3 times a year. But at the end of the meal, they were enjoying some grappa. And he came up to the kitchen to say hello and talk to people. And I said, so Cardinal, how'd you like that grappa? We just got that one in. And he said, can I tell you a story? I'm like, absolutely. So that, there's only two kinds of people that like grappa. Either you were born in Italy or you were conceived in Italy. And I was conceived in Italy. I
Wow.
mean, here's the Cardinal telling me about how he was conceived. I didn't know if I should laugh or I was just awkward, but yeah, nice
Well,
guy.
sure it was the rhythm method at that point, but
You're Catholic, probably.
I know I was one of seven and we were all a year apart. Perfect rhythm.
I never forget the time we were dining at Keefer's, and there was a guy sitting outside and sent his steak back. You remember this story?
Oh yeah, Carlo.
Yeah. And so you took the steak back out with a flashlight because the street lights made the steak look well done or more cooked. And you
Sure.
went out there and showed the guy with a fat flashlight. It was medium rare. Hilarious.
Yeah. He didn't want to believe me, but then again, he was British, so
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're off to a roaring start here, Anthony. I think we need to uh, let's talk about some of that history we were talking about.
So, John, what do you want to talk again? You want to talk
Well,
about
I
some
think
history?
some of the things that Scott and I had talked about earlier was
Yeah.
the way that things have evolved since 1979 or 80, whenever you and I both got in the business, and from purveyorships to um, you know, the the availability of products over the years that you didn't have at the beginning. And then I remember foie gras always came in a can when I first started, from France. And then, in the early 80s, we started to be able to procure fresh foie gras from upstate New York. And just, I always think of the farm to table movement, which everyone is over the last 15, 20 years is saying it's something new and exciting. But, it was going on in the 80s, just people didn't refer to it as much, I guess. But
Yeah,
there was,
in 1984, when Spiaggia opened, we had a wood burning grill and a wood burning oven. And, now everyone's cooking with fire. It's like, it's not new, man. It's not new. Cavemen were cooking like that.
right, exactly. And same with the local ingredients. I mean, I know you and I over the years have talked about people like the guys up at Ladybug Farms up in
Yeah,
Woodstock. I think it was Woodstock or Harvard, Illinois.
yeah,
Back in the late 80s, they were providing chefs with tomatoes and peppers and stuff grown locally. And it was exciting to be a part of that because it gave you a sense of supporting, local. Not only that, but supporting people that wanted to support you. I mean, same with, the lamb out of Pennsylvania, John Jameson, who when he started was this little guy. And now, I don't know about now because I'm not sure if he's still alive, but his family farm is still producing lamb for some of the best chefs in the country.
yeah,
So, that was exciting to see evolve. The whole, when I got in the business and you as well, there weren't a lot of young Americans in the business. There were mostly
yeah.
Europeans or Latinos or people that maybe had worked on cruise ships and ended up settling in Chicago. And it wasn't quite the rage that it's become over the years that it is now. And
Yeah, you needed a European chef and you were opening a restaurant in America. You went and got one. You sent word for someone. So it changed, like when we started doing it, instead of let's go get a European, a French chef, or an Italian chef, let's send our guys over there and let them learn with these guys and come back. You know, how many chefs came through the Playboy Club
I,
where name them. Can you name them all? There was a lot.
Blanchet, Bernard Cartier, Jean-Claude Polivet, um, Christian from that opened the 95th back in the day, Christian DeVoe, I think his name was. But
Yeah.
yeah, Arnie Morton brought all these guys from France to open the Playboy Club in Lake Geneva, and when it didn't pan out for whatever reason for those chefs, they all migrated to Chicago and opened great French restaurants, and that's where I really started to get my spark to get involved in the business. I started reading about that in the mid 70s when a lot of these guys were opening restaurants. And, it was, it's what changed the business in our great city. I mean,
Yeah,
that
think about it. If that wouldn't have happened, if those chefs weren't brought in, none of those chefs open restaurants in Chicago. Then how different would Chicago be?
very, very,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, what other things there? I'm thinking about back in the early '80s when, I don't know if you remember Kay Zubau and Tim Doyle had that company Wild Game.
Yep.
Nobody was serving game, nobody was serving foie gras, and it was to be able to have a purveyor that was committed to getting chefs the products that we wanted to work with was a game changer
Yeah.
for not just French food but Italian, I'm sure as well. And
Yeah. The first couple times I would order radicchio, they'd send me red cabbage and,
right, right,
fresh basil you couldn't get. So we ended up, when we opened Spiaggia in one of the storerooms, we put in grow lights and grew all our own basil
sure.
in a dark room. Not it wasn't a dark room, but it had a few windows. But still, that was the only way we could get fresh basil. So
Mhm.
it's nuts.
Yeah, you were lucky if you could get, you get parsley and dill back in the days. Dill,
Yeah, yeah,
dill, which I think was so abused back in the late '70s, early '80s, was now it's one of my favorite herbs because I quit using it for so many years.
yeah. Right.
and
Right.
it's delicious, soft, sweet herb. And it's like, those were the only two that I remember being available. Maybe chives, maybe, but
Yeah.
you couldn't get all the fresher. We always put our hand in the big plastic, bucket of dried herbs, and that was what we had. You didn't
That's
have
right.
fresh. You didn't have. I remember, dear Roy and Bonnie from Seafood Merchant, 1979, my first job. Roy and I was just a salad guy, but I was starting to learn to want to cook, so I'd ask Roy if I could buy fish from him direct, to take home and start honing my craft. And he'd pull up in his station wagon. He didn't have a truck, and he had Dover sole and Norwegian salmon because Jean Bonchet wanted it, and
Yeah.
because Jean wanted it, Roy found a way to get it to him. And those were the only, basically, you could get walleye probably and perch in the seasons, but there was no tuna, there was no John
Nothing.
Doe, there was no sea bass. You couldn't find it. It wasn't around. So to see that evolution of the great procurement of world, not just, because Chicago being a major hub in the airline industry, we could get stuff from all over the world, as like starting in the mid to late 80s. You could get
Yeah.
fish from Hawaii, from Asia, from Latin America, from Europe, and it changed the game. I mean, it gave chefs an opportunity to work with some items that were different, and people bought in. I mean, certainly in the styles of restaurants we worked in, people bought in. I don't know if they still have at this point in the juncture, but certainly back then they wanted to try these new things because they were reading about chefs like Bonchet and Andre Soltner, God rest his soul, and these people from other cities they were the real deals. And
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, John. I don't think there are a lot of chefs starting out that know who Jean Bochet was. They know about the Jean Bochet Awards. They have no idea who Jean Bochet was. Ask them about Andre Soltner. They don't know who Andre Soltner is. And that's sort of
away a few weeks ago, so
yeah, well, maybe, yeah.
maybe,
But it's just sad. These people should be remembered for what they did. It's huge. We wouldn't be where we are today if we weren't standing on their shoulders. So
gonna say, if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be sitting here talking to Scott and Catherine right now.
So who was the most influential chef in your career? Was it Joho?
For many reasons, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I was fortunate enough to work with a couple of the older French chefs and spark that, I mean, that refinement of cuisine that, I worked in a Greek restaurant when I was like 12, 13 years old, washing dishes and bussing tables. So that was all I knew before I got
But you could smoke back then while you were doing that in that Greek
Oh,
time.
l'escargot. Lucien had hired me, and there was a chef there at the time, a French guy, and he'd be standing over the red wine sauce, and there'd be like a half-inch ash from his cigarette, and it's like, if you want to add a little smoke, you can just smoke over the pot. It's like, it's like it was like, yeah, the rules were so much different back then. I mean, society hadn't. I mean, the kitchen was, a place for misfits for the most part.
Pirates. We're pirates.
Pirates. There you go. And we still are.
I think for me, the most influential person that I ever worked with was Chef Nadia Santini, and at 3-star Michelin Del Pescatore in Lombardia, which we need to go to someday. But
one day, Del Pescatore, yeah.
And the thing about her was she was an incredible teacher, a gentle person, like took the time to explain to you, and if there was a moment where not even a dish on her menu, she was, when was the last time you made spaghetti pomodoro? I went, a couple weeks ago or whatever. She's like, no, you never made it right. And then she didn't know that was how I made it, but she knew that most Americans, young American cooks, or Americans in general, didn't know the real way. And it's like she cooked the spaghetti maybe 50% in water, and then the rest of it in tomato sauce. So the pasta absorbed that tomato sauce. And It was like such a different dish. So
You know, you
those learning moments where you'd never forget.
of course, yeah. And you taught me about marrying the sauce. I mean, that's one big thing I learned from you very early on in our friendship was you got to marry the sauce. You don't cook the pasta the same amount of time that the box tells you. You cook it 3 or 4 minutes less, and then
Yeah.
you finish it in the sauce and let that pasta absorb that beautiful
Yeah.
sauce.
Yeah.
And you don't put olive oil on the pasta, Anthony.
Yeah.
No
Well,
olive oil in the pot.
in the water. No.
No.
Um. What else? What else can you remember from back then?
Um.
I think I mean, I want to tell the story about cooking a state dinner, but I don't want to cut you off. So.
Oh, go ahead. Tell the story,
Yeah.
man.
Well, we were on a tangent there about products and mentors and things like that. So, anyone else you want to mention?
Well, I mean, though I never worked for him, I ended up becoming friends with him later in my career. Was Jean Bonche. I mean, he was the man as far as real, solid French cuisine was. And I was fortunate enough. I worked in a hotel very early on in my career, and we took a couple field trips to Le Francais, the whole kitchen. The chef got money probably from the GM of the hotel or the F&B director,
Yeah.
whatever. And they'd sponsor us, and we'd go and eat at Le Francais a couple times, and I'll never forget it. It was life changing. I'm talking like 1982 or three in that area, maybe 81.
Yeah.
And it was like, I had eaten at Chez Paul and I had eaten at Jovan and a couple other French restaurants, but I had never eaten the the haute grand cuisine like that. I mean, so he certainly was an influence. That I worked with two Japanese chefs in the early '80s, and those guys really influenced me. And they were trained well, they were trained in Japan initially, and then they worked at the Ritz-Carlton in Paris, and they were brought here to open the Hamilton Hotel, which is out. It's Weston now, I believe. It's out in Itasca, and they
Yeah.
hired these three guys that worked at the Ritz-Carlton in Paris to come and open this hotel, and they were amazing. They knew French food, and we ate sushi for like comida at night. There were two sushi restaurants in the whole city at the time, but we were fortunate enough to where they'd splurge on some bluefin tuna, and we'd eat that for
Yeah.
lunch. So yeah, the product changing was very
Yeah.
instrumental to guys like you and I being able to succeed and move forward, because with new product comes new excitement, and with that comes new ideas, and you turn it into something very memorable for everyone. And
You were sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. I was going to say, and cooking Italian food, it's all about the product. I was trained in France where it's all about technique, and I mean it's
Yeah.
about product as well. But I think initially a lot of the technique was was brought upon by disguising tastes of things that maybe weren't
Right.
quite right. Put a heavy sauce on something, they'll never know it's a month old. Sorry for any of those French chefs out
Mhm.
there.
It's like the famous words of Marcella Hazan: the most important ingredient in a dish is the one you leave out.
Right.
That's because less is more in Italian cooking. And
Right.
yeah, there's technique, but there's ingredients that are more important than anything else. But
Yeah. So what's
um,
your story about the state dinner?
so we did a state dinner, our first state dinner we did at the Art Institute, and it was maybe 2011, right after the Modern Wing opened,
Mm-hmm.
and we we were cooking a dinner for the First Lady and 12 others, significant others of
Was
world
it
leaders.
Eleanor Roosevelt you're talking about?
Who?
Eleanor Roosevelt.
That's not so funny, but thank you. No, it was Michelle Obama, right? So uh, we are everyone in the museum before the dinner started, whether you were a security guard or whatever, you were brought into this room. So there was like 50, 60 people in this room. And the Secret Service guy was so pissed off, the lead guy, because somebody kept propping open the back one of the delivery doors, and he's like, and he's yelling. It's like, I'm gonna find you, and I'm gonna take your credentials, and I'm gonna throw your ass on the street. And everyone was like, oh wow, this guy's serious. So after he was done, he's like, okay, you're all dismissed except for you, and he pointed to me. I'm like, oh shit, what did I? Is there something in my past I don't know about? What's going on? And sorry, got a little excited. I'm back. So he says, you have to stay. So everyone laughed, and I like walked over to him. He's walking over to me, and I'm like, what's up? He's like, well, I'm building a wine cellar in my basement, and I have a few questions about how I should. Funny. I thought something was wrong, and he just wanted advice on how to build a wine cellar.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
was one dinner.
Yeah.
And that was the dinner that the first lady wanted only bison to be served, and as you know, John, bison cannot be served cooked more than rare.
Right.
And the gallery where the dinner was inside the Art Institute, there was a Liechtenstein exhibit, and the Liechtenstein estate wanted no red wine poured near the artwork.
Oh wow.
So you're serving rare bison, which had to be wheeled across the museum from one end to the other, making sure it was hot but rare. And then Kathy came up with a wine that if you closed your eyes and served it, room temperature, that was white, it was actually had mouthfeel of a red, and it was from California. What was it, Kath? Marsan Roussan. From California. I don't remember the winery, but Dow was the winery, and it actually worked. That was a crazy time, but we had fun that night. Yeah. Another time we cooked in Washington D.C. at a State Department dinner, also another state dinner, and it was the Prime Minister of Italy at the time, Matteo Renzi, and some other, John Kerry and whoever else was in the leadership at that point, and they said, "Oh, Tony, we'd like you to come to this room and meet Matteo Renzi." And I'm like, okay, and I'm standing there, and they're talking. I think it was John Kerry, Joe Biden, and Matteo Renzi, and yeah. And I'm waiting patiently on the side of the room, and Matteo Renzi starts waving me over to come over. Need to talk to you. And he started to tell Biden and Kerry, like, have you ever been to Spiaggia in Chicago? It's the best Italian restaurant in America. You have to go there. And I'm just like listening to him. It's like, what an endorsement. And it's like, done. It's the end right there. Yeah. So that was fun.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah.
Something else we should touch on is some of the philanthropical work we've done with Masters over the years. I think especially Scott, I don't know if I know you live in Wisconsin now, but we used to do
that's just no, I'm in Chicago now, but I have a home in Wisconsin.
Right.
So, okay.
Well, and then Tony's from Kenosha, and we used to do a dinner at his restaurant Manja for 25 years. We actually did it for charity, and it was called Masters of the Grill. And we'd invite chefs from initially Chicago, and then as Tony became a really big shooter on the national scene, we were able to get some national talent there. And it was just one of those things that, we're asked to do a lot of charity work in our lives and careers, but to do it at Tony's family-owned restaurant in Kenosha and have just 25 years of history of people, not just the chefs that would be there, but all the clients that would come year in and year out. And it was just, something that we do on a regular, or did for me, Tony probably still does some, is charitable work. And it's just, through food, you're able to open people's eyes to a lot of poignant issues, around surrounded by us, and not only our city, but in obviously in the Wisconsin area. And that was just so fulfilling to do that, especially with Tony every year. Last weekend of last Sunday of June, and it was just it was unbelievable. It was just so much fun and so much. I mean, we raised a lot of money. We had chefs from everywhere coming to do it, and it was outdoors, and it was just, it's one of those things as a chef that you can give back a little bit. And I mean, athletes do it, people do it all the time, but for us, it was like, you were able to project your beliefs, I guess, on your clientele through charitable work, and it was amazing. And I miss it. And Dan wants to do it at some point in the next year or two, so we got to get going on. We're reviving that event.
Yeah, we need to do that again. That's for sure. But we did do it. We have done. I mean, all the things we've done together, all the events that we've done together, it's just indicative of our peers and our industry. Like, who are the first people to lend a helping hand? Always a service industry, you
Yeah.
know. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, we were fortunate to be able to do a lot together, and that's, I think, what helped give us bounding the bond that we have to,
Yes.
was being able to travel a little bit, do events in different cities, and I mean, it was certainly, looking back on it, and this past year, not being in the kitchen anymore, I made a commitment to get out and do a few, and this year I'm going to do more. And it's,
As long as we don't go back to Kansas City, we'll be okay.
Oh boy.
Oh no, don't tell that story.
Well,
So I think for me, the at this point now in my career, it's so rewarding for me to still be friends with a lot of the people that have that I've mentored, and that are successful on their own, like Sarah Gruenberg and Joe Flam and Missy Robbins and Effie Madrano, and I mean, I could go on and on about these people, and it's just so rewarding. And then, like, we still talk. Like, if they need a word of advice, they'll give me a call or give me a text. So, yeah, I really cherish that a lot, and I feel good about that. Lives on. And I think too, John, one of the reasons we put that picture up of you and I and Chris and Kathy is like how to emphasize how important family is, and like our industry is just leaves a litany of, failed relationships and abuse and addiction. And like, you and I have made the effort to stay, to be family men. We started this conversation before everyone came on, talking about Elliot, your 2-year-old grandson, and how important that is to you now. And I think a lot of times young chefs lose focus. Like, I need to get my 3rd Michelin star, my 2nd Michelin star, and I don't give a shit what happens to my relationship or whatever. Then they don't give a shit, but they keep, they hope everything works out in the end and keep their fingers crossed. But you've got to devote time to your family and to your relationships in order, because at the end of your career, you're going to have your family, and you hope that they still want to be with you.
right. Yeah. And it's, it's like Glenn used to say to me, my old partner, it's like, how do you want to be remembered, And part of it is being remembered for, I mean, I have 6 children, from 2 different marriages, and raising kids and grandkids, and it's not really a business that's conducive to doing that very well. But as we got older and focused more on what was maybe more important than other things, and that's the way it worked.
Well, you have a blended family. It's not like you have 2 different marriages. You and your wife married, and you both had, right?
Yeah.
Like what do you call? Isn't that like the Brady Brunch or something?
It is the Brady
Yeah.
Bunch. 3 boys, 3 girls, 2 different marriages. Yeah.
The
And it's-
The
and
Hogan bunch.
and I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately. I think fortunately, I think 5 of my 6 children worked in the restaurant business at some point.
Yeah.
Under the guise that this is not going to be permanent or else.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's served them so well in their careers that they all have now. None of them are involved in the restaurant business,
Yeah.
which I'm very happy and fortunate for that. But
Yeah.
they've all succeeded very well at what they did, and I believe that those couple years that each of them might have spent in restaurants helped shape their work ethic and their
Yeah.
personability and social skills. And it's just, there's a lot of great things to be said for what we've done our whole lives, Tony. And you had mentioned some of the ones that weren't so great earlier, but I think when at the end of the day, it's like we made people happy for our lives. And that's, to me, that was the reward. Going out in the dining room and seeing people raising a glass and laughing and crying and cheering and
Yeah.
enjoying. And there's not a, I mean, I guess there are a lot of careers that can offer you that, but only one that offers you that and drives you nuts at the same time, I think.
And
So,
doesn't pay you very well in the beginning as well.
right, right.
Yeah, for sure. That's very rewarding at this point. We were able to still work or consult and work on projects, but at the same time, I'm not in operations. I don't need to be the
Right.
one expediting at night. I mean, people would
That's
feel
the
sorry
thing.
for me. Yeah.
Remember the first couple trips down to Nashville? I'm like, so Tom, where do you get this? I don't know. Ask the chef, man. I have no idea where we get this. And then,
This better be good.
but you've always been able to, take a step and look down, not down meaning down on people, but look from up above the restaurant situation. And you've been very fortunate to have great people around you, and you mentored those people into great success. And I mean, that's so rewarding. It's like,
Thanks.
I mean,
Yeah, thanks. That makes me proud.
wow, you should be proud.
Yeah.
And then,
Um, yeah.
so, what else? What else? What else? The change
How
in the
we
business. I mean, I think one of the things that for me, when I, hooked up with Glenn, and opened a steakhouse, which in my career, I'd never thought I would open a steakhouse, but they caught me at the right time. I had just closed my French restaurant and I wasn't
Yeah.
sure what I wanted to do, but what we offered the employees, we had the same employees for 15 years at that restaurant, 14 years. We offered insurance for everyone. We,
Wow.
I mean, we literally paid for insurance for everyone for a while until the recession hit, and paid vacation. And, it's like, try and make it so that people want to come to work and want to be part of your team. And, I was thinking about how dysfunctional the business is the other day, and how it's just, there's just so much, um, there's so many downsides to being in the business. And the upside is what keeps you going every day. I mean, it sounds kind of
Absolutely.
cliche, but being proud of what you do and taking care of people is, it's like I mean, it's what drove me. I mean,
Yeah.
and I always equated it to playing on a sports team. I played
Yeah.
sports, and you're on the field every night, every day, lunch, dinner.
Yeah.
The timing, it's like you got to react now. You got to get this done now. And it's like the people that have excelled, I believe, in the business just are they're kind of, you got to be very team oriented. You got to be very, uh, you can't be real selfish, although
Yeah.
there's definitely some of that nature in the business. But, and then, it's the good times like we've had over the years. I mean,
Bless.
we've kind of cheated a little bit because we've just had so much fun doing what we do, and then being
But
able to go to work with you, for 5 years towards the end of my career in the kitchen was
Yeah.
just so special, It was like when I worked with David Burke, I said, Dave, we got to be friends when we're done. There's not going to be any,
Yeah.
we can't walk away from this saying, oh, that guy, this guy, the other guy. It's like,
You know what, John, we don't take ourselves that serious. A lot of chefs take themselves serious,
I guess, yeah.
egos. But anyway, you were saying about Burke.
Well, just I said when we're done with this venture, we got to be friends, and we were better friends afterwards than when we began.
Yeah.
And that was so important. Same with you. I mean, we kind of rolled the dice, especially with our situation. Who knows what's going to come out at the end? And we came out smelling like a rose, both of us. So
I think you're right. You mentioned about how your girls were in the restaurant business. Were any of your sons in the restaurant business? Oh,
oh
yeah.
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 I mean, Jeremy worked for Dan and Beth at
That's
Ocean,
right. I knew
and
that.
he
Yeah.
worked in the kitchen for about 4 or 5 years, and then Corey waited tables for a while, and wasn't real happy with it, which is kind of when I got him into martial arts. I saw him really struggling
Yeah.
emotionally because he just wasn't happy working in the business. So I got him for Christmas a membership at a gym, and now he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's teaching his kids that. And it's great discipline for the kids. It was good
Yeah.
for him. He needed it at the time. And the business again, I always said it'll beat you up and spit you out if you're not ready for it.
Yeah.
So
You know, our son, he was around the restaurant business his whole life, and
sure.
he's just like, you know, he understands the business, but he didn't end up in restaurants. He ended up being a national editor for an online publication, and he has writers that he manages from all over the country.
Right.
And so he's in the business, but I think he's a little bit smarter. He doesn't have
Yeah.
to work like the crazy days. Are we guys? Do we need to take questions yet? Are we?
Yeah, this would be a great time. I'll start off with a few questions for each of you. Um, Over the years, we've heard that Chicago has a wonderful collaborative chef community, which isn't necessarily typical in other cities. Can you talk a little bit about that? Obviously, you two are uh, the gold standard for collaboration, but what is it like working with the chef community in Chicago? You'd all get together to do certain events and things like that. Can you describe that?
Well, I've always said that Chicago chef community was a very tight knit group. Um, I have a lot of friends that are chefs in New York, and New York was kind of a little different situation, I thought. But to be able to, I mean, here's an example, and Tony can elaborate a little on this. But I used to do every Monday before Thanksgiving a chef's dinner. Um, where I did chucrut, sauerkraut from Alsace, which, interesting story there. Sidebar. Before I worked with Joho, he was working at when he left Maxime's, he went to Avanzar. He started working with Rich and Lettuce, and I was the chef at L'Escargot right across the street. And the owner told me the chef owner had passed away, and he says, "Well, in February we're going to do chucrut." I go, "What the hell's chucrut?" I didn't know. And I went across the street, introduced myself to Joho, which we had met at Maxime's, and he walked me through step by step how to make chucrut. And
Uh,
so it started in 1997, and it was eight guys, and it wasn't even chucrut at that point. It was a white truffle dinner.
yeah.
Which was fabulous. And then over the years, it grew from 8 to 15 to 30 to it was close to probably 120 people towards the end. And it was chefs, restaurateurs, wine people, actors, musicians, just, just rogues of the night, to quote a line out of Clockwork Orange, rogues of the night. And Tony attended many of them. And it was just a way, the idea started, I was doing an event in Seattle with Sean McLean and Henry Adania from Trio. And here we are 2,300 miles from Chicago. And I'm like, you know what? I haven't seen you guys in like a year. This is crazy. We got to go to Seattle to see each other. And that's where the idea sparked from. I got to do something to bring everyone together. And it was an amazing event. And people were, you know, for at least for that night, everyone put their egos aside. We talked, we collaborated on ideas, we ate great food, drank wines, and it was just a magnificent event. And it was part of I felt like I was kind of giving back to the chef community that took so great care of me over the years, you know.
Agreed. 100% agree.
So Scott, to answer your question, I guess was kind of a roundabout way. I think the chef community in Chicago is pretty tight. And I think, you know, I think it reflects our Midwestern values too. I don't think it's got anything to do with much more than that. I think, you know, down when you look at it, deep down, Midwestern people, Chicago people are very amiable, and they can open their lives and their doors to other people and not be jealous or have any kind of animosity towards their competitors. I mean, again, to me, it goes back to being an athlete in sports. You gotta, even though you want to beat the other team, you still want to play the game properly and enjoy people around you. And it was a pleasure. So yes, I think Chicago chef community is pretty tight.
Tony, you mentioned about cooking at the White House. Did you do you've done other things at the White House too, haven't you? Other dinners at the White House, is that right?
The state dinners we did were at the Art Institute and at the State Department. The White House was more, at one point I was part of the culinary diplomatic corps, and it was a bunch of chefs that that we had our own like State Department chef coats, and we would do dinners. It still exists. I'm not a part of it anymore, but so we spent time in the White House, you know, learning things or learning how things work and protocol and that kind of stuff. But the state dinners that occurred in the Art Institute and the State Department, and you know, it's funny, like protocol is so huge. I mean, when we did the dinner at the Art Institute for the First Lady, or no, we did yeah, that was it, right? And basically, they serve the First Lady or the President first, and then they go around to everyone else. And as soon as the First Lady or the President puts down their fork, the whole table's cleared. Even if you just got your main course, it's like you're done. And you know, when we did that dinner at the Art Institute for our state, one of the state dinners we did, it's like a sense of surprise too. It's the one where the guy has advice about building a wine cellar. But when we were up and we were set up in this gallery waiting to serve, and these like 4 gentlemen walk up in beautiful tuxedos, never saw them before. We're ready to serve, and I'm like, he's like, "How you doing tonight?" I said, "I'm great. What's up? Who are you guys?" He goes, "We're the White House butlers. Like, we're going to serve the meal, not your servers. They're going to hand the plates to us because they just don't know protocol, or they don't know, you know, the system of how we do things." So that was pretty interesting.
John, any tips for us eaters on steaks? Anything profound about steaks that we should know when ordering it or buying it, or anything you can?
Well, you know, I mean, having been in a steakhouse situation 14 years, I learned a lot about steak that I really didn't know prior. Because in France, you have maybe a fillet and you have a steak au poivre, New York steak. But what I've discovered now, especially that I'm selling meat, is that I like the offcuts and the ribeye, the New York, the fillet. That's all great, but all the stuff like the top sirloin, the bottom sirloin, or what's called sirloin flap, or what is a true bavette, great steak. The Denver steak. I mean, there's cuts out of the shoulder that are delicious. So for me, if someone's wanting to learn about a little steak, go out and find a resource for what we call the kind of the offcuts, the cuts that aren't so expensive. They're not necessarily melt in your mouth, but they have that big beef flavor. I mean, that's what I look for now.
But you gotta know how to cook it. There's some talent there. That not everyone's John Hogan. I mean, it's much
Thank
easier.
goodness for that.
It's much easier to cook a fillet at home. So if the question is what is a good steakhouse tip, I think was the question.
Yeah. Well, steakhouse tip or just a steak tip? I mean, like I said, I mean, I just, for me, the tip is to find stuff that is not your normal everyday
I
cut,
agree with that.
or porterhouse or ribeye or bone-in ribeye, or what I think is a real waste is the tomahawk steak. It's like, to me, it's ridiculous. It's like,
But it looks cool.
It looks cool, but why do you want to spend all that money on a bone you can't eat?
Right.
In my opinion,
You know what I'm really happy to see back, like popular again, is prime rib. Prime rib, all of a sudden now, I mean, Daniel Boulud opened a prime rib restaurant in New York. Like,
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. So anyway.
Salim just joined the meeting.
Oh.
Hi, Salim. Sorry.
Tony, I had a question for you too about Italian food. You mentioned Marcella Hazan a little bit earlier, and years ago I had the honor of interviewing her, and she complained to me about the way Italian food is served in this country. She said, or food in general, she said, you have this big pile of architecture. She said, in Italy, it's a simple plate of this, a simple plate of that. She says, why all this architecture? And then she finished up the interview by asking me, where can I find a good Chicago steak? So I thought you'd get a kick out of that, John. But anyway, Tony, can you talk about the essence of what good Italian food is? I mean, and also why were you considered, do you know, the first fine Italian dining place? What does that mean?
Well, it's look, if you want to be taken seriously, your portions have to be sensible. No one's getting a Michelin star if you're like piling on, architecture, to quote her, Marcella. But it's all about keeping it really simple is what Italian food is about. And olive oil is not is a sauce. Balsamic vinegar is one of the few condiments that's made by just cooking down grape must. And if you go to a store and you read a lot of labels in grocery stores of balsamic vinegar, it's apple cider vinegar, caramel coloring. There should only be one ingredient in real balsamic vinegar. A lot of people don't know this, but that's the key. And that 100% cooked grape must that's then stored in many different wood barrels is the real deal. And so now there's this formula that's gotten out where you can make balsamic vinegar by combining apple cider vinegar and but balsamic vinegar starts from must, which then develops the mother. It's not like people are adding vinegar to balsamic vinegar. It's what happens. It's fermenting. It's incredible. So so I'm not sure what the question was again, but it's just really about olive oil. Olive oil needs to be fresh. Balsamic vinegar shouldn't be fresh at all, but olive oil doesn't last a long time once you've opened it. And then that's where it came from and who produced it, that factor into that as well. But you open your olive oil, you better use it up in 6 months. I don't think it's the same thing. So
and look for a born on date on it. Don't buy
Yes.
olive oil that was made 5, 7, 8 years prior. Buy
Yes.
it that was made last season, you know?
That's right. Best if used by date
Right.
is at least 2 or 3 years after it was harvested.
Right.
And why do you think, and this isn't even fair to ask you, but why do you think you were considered like the first to have fine Italian dining in Chicago? What is fine Italian dining compared to what?
So having before Spiaggia opened, Kathy and I lived in Italy, and we worked in 3-star Michelin restaurants in Italy and 2-star, 1-star, and just the way that they handled products and the way that they looked to their region for inspiration or for ingredients, and not, oh, I'm going to fly these Maine lobster in and create this dish. Their cuisine was based on things that their mother cooked, but they wanted to just update it, like a little bit less of this, but not losing the essential spirit of the dish. And having seen all those places in Italy, having worked there, having dined there with Kathy, it's like that was our inspiration. In the States, there weren't Italian restaurants like those restaurants, and that's what we modeled Spiaggia after. And I was, lucky to work with Larry Levy, who had that vision as well. He's like, yeah, okay, we're going to open in a year, but you and Kathy should go live in Italy for a year and work in restaurants and learn, and then come back and we'll open it. So it's just this, we just put too many things on a plate in this country, and too much cheese, and too much dunking things in ranch dressing. And I'm sure if you love it, I'm happy for you. It's just not. And like, don't put peas in your carbonara. Don't change. If you're gonna put other things in addition, still call it the dish that it was conceived as. That sort of makes me upset. But it's just the spirit of being less food, great food, in a very upscale atmosphere, meaning the service is great. The wine list, like Spiaggia was the first restaurant in America that had a 100% all Italian wine list, which blew Italian winemakers' minds. They're like, what do you mean? You don't have any French? You know what I mean? I mean, we had champagne, but we didn't have French wines. So that, all those little touches, I think, meant something to people.
I'm getting so hungry right now. Anyway, Kathy, how would you like to open it up for the chat questions?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. So, what are the first things? Oh, what are the first things my chef's book? What book? Sorry. What are the first things chefs look at on dishes in a restaurant when they go for the first time? Okay, I think they're looking at it from your chef's point of view, looking at dishes when you visit a restaurant. I think that's the.
So what do we see, or what do we look for?
I think how you evaluate it, or maybe not. You just enjoy the experience. I don't know.
No, we usually don't enjoy dining out. We usually, no, kidding.
unless we're together,
Yeah, right.
we enjoy it. Again, and I think there's a point to be made there. I think, going out to eat is it's a social contract. I mean, the best part about it is being able to sit with friends or family and break bread and drink wine and eat great food, and to sit down, like, I think when I was a younger chef, I'd go out and I'd look at it and I'd try and break it down and critique. Now it's just, I want to go out, I want to enjoy the people I'm with, I want to eat good food. Doesn't have to be all over the top. More importantly, have great service. I think, and as chefs, I think most chefs think, oh, the food's the most important thing. I was fortunate enough to work at Everest and at Keefer's, where our service was, to me, it was as good or better than the food we were producing,
100%.
And I think that's a big thing that people, you don't have to go and try and break down every dish. You go out to enjoy yourselves, and so for me, that's the rub. It's like, go out, have fun, try not to critique anything, because as a chef, if you could break a meal down and find fault in all kinds of things. But
Yeah.
what's the point of going out at that point?
Yeah.
There isn't a point of going out. I mean,
Yeah.
Tony and Kathy and I and Beth and Dan from Outremont have been going out and having dinner once every month or so, and it's just to be able to be together, and
Yeah.
that to me that's the most important part of it is having that, being able to sit across from someone or next to someone and have good conversation and eat some really good food if hopefully, and we kind of, as chefs, you kind of know where to pick. I mean, I think we have a little bit of insight as to who's doing great work, and that's the most important thing is the company and the conversation and we'll talk. We went out a few weeks ago and we talked about the food. It was terrific, and we talked about it. But it's not the most important thing. Most
Yeah.
important thing is being together at this point.
One a chef said to me one time, and I still, I can't get it out of my head. If you're in a restaurant that serves their food on square plates, it's probably a bad restaurant.
There might be something to be said for that.
Think
I
about
mean,
it next time
you
you're
know,
out.
I used to love going to Carlos, up in Highwood, because Carlos would go to Mexico and he'd buy all these off plates at whatever, flea
Yeah.
markets or from his family's collection, and nothing matched. And they weren't like Bernardo, they weren't Villeroy and Bach, they were like plates. And the food spoke to the plate, not the other way around. Like you say, if you got to put it on a square plate, it means you're probably missing something on the execution side of it.
Yeah,
Maybe I don't.
So,
exactly.
Carol Haddix inquires, what do you think of today's Chicago food scene, the good and the bad?
Hi, Carol.
Hi, Carol.
I mean, I think to me, I feel like again we're one of the top food cities in the world at this point, and I think, and that doesn't mean we have the most 3-star Michelin restaurants or Michelin restaurants at all. We have people from all over the world, and they've come here and they've put their roots into Chicago, and they're cooking the cuisine of their culture. And this is what makes Chicago such a special place. The Latin food, the Asian food, the Italian food, the French food, the Korean food in Chicago is amazing. And it's just having the neighborhoods, Vietnamese food. It's just having that option to go out and experience other cultures' food, and not only food, but their presentation of what they're doing. So
Yeah, I really like what's happening in Chicago now, where there's, I mean, I'm learning about it. Chicago's learning about the cuisine, how important Filipino cuisine has become, or
yeah.
Cambodian, and these restaurants are so exciting. I mean, Kasama is incredible, and they do things that no one else does. So I think Chicago's always been a place where people can open something off the mainstream a little bit, and I think there's perfect examples of that. And I love going to those restaurants and having someone explain to me, this is how my grandmother did it and this is how we're doing it. And it's just that part I think is really great. The worst part for restaurants in Chicago right now, I think, are you know these like giant fraternity pizza places that dunk their things dunk their pizza crust in in dressing, in Thousand, or not Thousand Island, but
Oh, ranch.
Ranch, right? I
I
mean, I
got
know
I
that's
got a bunch of oh,
the
I
second
got
time
a
I
bunch
brought
of
that up,
girls. Yeah.
but
You know what? To me is the worst condiment on the planet. But and my wife and kids, I know they're probably listening at my daughter's house.
yeah,
Ranch
sorry,
is
Chris.
not doesn't belong on a salad, let alone pizza. Okay.
But it's those places are there's tons of them now, and I just don't think. I mean, it's a bar basically, but yeah, that's what I think are some of the most exciting things and not so exciting things. It's also hard, like when we were in Chicago, when we were having restaurants in Chicago, Michigan Avenue was the center. Like if you were on Michigan Avenue or in the Gold Coast. Like, this is where you wanted to have a restaurant. Now, completely different neighborhoods are coming in. It's really cool. I like it.
Yeah.
So, do either of you perceive that innovation in Chicago retail groceries, for instance, Treasure Island, helped improve availability of produce and or meat, fish for the restaurant trade, and or helped to increase demand for fine restaurant meals?
I think it starts with chefs. I think it starts with chefs and restaurateurs, and we demand the product, and they filter down to the grocery stores, which then provide more access to a lot of different people. But the whole idea of what's new and what's hot begins in restaurants, begins with
Of course.
chefs. But you need the grocery stores to back you up. So if someone says this is an incredible, whatever meatball, where'd you get this mix? You have to be able to tell people where they can buy it. Or this is a great olive oil. Where can I buy this olive oil? They want to know where they can get it. So the grocery stores are important in the food chain for sure.
I agree. I mean, you've done some work with food companies as well as myself, and it seems as though, I don't know about now with social media, it's probably a little quicker, but back in the day, we'd come up with an idea or a new food stuff, and 10 years later, it would hit the grocery stores and hit the people's market.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's probably much quicker because they can see it on their phone all day. But
Well,
back in the day,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it is much quicker now. Yeah, because
I'm
of
sure
that.
it is.
Yeah.
But in the old days, I remember working with Lucien back in the day, and he would say it's about 10 years behind,
Yeah.
and you know, and that's why he was smart. He was a former chef, and he was a corporate chef for Kraft Foods and Nestle for a while, and he would bring chefs in to introduce new products to those big food companies.
Yeah,
And,
we
and
went together. You and I
yeah,
went together one
we
time.
went to Memphis, right?
Yeah, with Jackie and yeah.
Yeah. Jackie and I slept on the floor. We couldn't get out because there was a tornado, and you got out.
I don't
You
know
got out
how.
before us, Jackie.
Anyway,
So, if you had to pick one, what was your favorite or most challenging dish that you prepared? Each of you, I'm sure, have different experiences.
For me, I mean, as a young cook, I was enamored. I went to France in '83, same time Tony went to Italy, and I got to taste a lot of different charcuterie items. And that's what I wanted to learn. I'd go home, I'd buy stuff, I'd make stuff at home, and usually I always say don't quit on a dish. You can always fix it, but with charcuterie, if you screw it up, it's really kind
yeah.
of hard to bring it back. Although not necessarily impossible. But so for me, it was learning to do all those force meats and pate en croûte and fish mousses and things that take a little bit of finesse, and I think it's a little bit of chemistry involved because you need the right proportions of salt to fat to meat and the marination and in some cases fermentation, certainly in Italy. And so those were kind of the things I found the most challenging, and that's why I really wanted to go out and learn it. I mean, and I was able to do that through a lot of practice. I threw a lot of bad pate out back in the early '80s.
For me, it was trying to serve hot, rare bison. Uh,
The Art Institute, walking it past Chagall
yeah,
with no red wine.
right. That was a
Going off,
challenge.
oh, good, sorry. Going off one
Go.
of Scott's earlier questions, are you keeping up on your social collaborative relationships with the younger chefs?
Um,
Generation here. I know there are so many more than back when you two got your footing, so it probably more challenging to keep up with the new chefs or get to know them.
I I
um,
I think I'm probably a little more active still in restaurants than John is. So the most important, the most rewarding part for me is when I'm working with someone who's, in their mid 20s and I recognize the fact that this person has the passion that they want to grow. It's like, I mean, working with young people keeps me young, and uh, I don't find it challenging. I find it to be very rewarding to be able to work with young kids.
Okay, your friend Celine. I would like
Hi,
to ask.
Celine.
By the I don't know Celine, but had offered if you guys ran out of questions that Celine would ask you a lot more questions. How's that? This was earlier today. I would like to ask let's see, ask Chef Tony about prosciutto service in Chicago. Does he think that chefs in our town are able to execute it in a perfect way? Because as I know, simple things like that are more important than complicated meals for him.
Oh my God, Salim, you're so funny. We always joke that it's a very rare thing to have prosciutto sliced properly in an Italian restaurant. It's usually too thick or they shave it. So it's a real skill. And Salim is the chef of Yolan in Nashville, where we were the last 5 years. And we were just at his pop-up dinner last night for his Turkish restaurant that he's opening, fine dining Turkish, which is going to be incredible. And I had coffee with him this morning in Nashville. But um, I would say we have a joke because we've been to Chicago a couple times, and every time, and we won't mention names, we went to the prosciutto was sliced wrong. And we got, we were slicing it right in Nashville the whole time. And he got a kick out of the fact that, he came from Nashville to a big city like Chicago, and he couldn't find properly sliced prosciutto. That's why he's asking that question.
I was thinking last night actually about ham service at Le Perroquet.
Wow.
We had the jambon de Bayonne, the Bayonne ham, which I don't know if you can get it in the States anymore. You could
I think you
for
can.
you were able to, and then in the late '80s, I think they put a USDA put a ban on it for some reason. But the guys there, they'd have that thin bladed slicer,
Yeah.
very long and thin, and
By
they would
hand.
by hand at the table, and you could see your hand through it. If you held it up, you could see through it. I mean, it was paper thin. And the guys that did that were, to me, I mean, I tried and I failed. I could never do it like they could. And
Yeah.
again, experience, cures all. But yeah, a great ham service. I don't know of any that are in Chicago at this point, but maybe, possibly. Salim, maybe we
So,
need.
so I think this is a question for each of you, but what do you cook at home for family meals?
Okay. Well, because I'm not in a kitchen anymore, I cook like I always wanted to cook and eat. I mean, Tony had been proud of me. A couple nights ago, I made risotto de tinta de calamari with calamari and fresh basil puree, and then I don't know if this is proper, chef. You're gonna have to tell me. But I noticed that everyone's putting like seasoned breadcrumbs on salads now and whatnot. I bought some Serrano ham that my wife, who's listening, dear, she opened it and took a few slices and then didn't wrap it up, so it kind of dried a little bit. So I put it in my dehydrator and I made Serrano chips, and then I
Nice.
blended that with garlic, breadcrumbs, thyme, and marjoram, and a little olive oil, and I sprinkled that just for a little crunch texture on the risotto, and it was. And again, I gotta thank Joho for that, because Joho, we had a squid ink risotto. It was the only basic Italian dish that we had on the menu at Everest,
I remember.
but it was amazing. And
Didn't
it was
he?
his method, and it was amazing. It was so good. But so I kind of go a little goofy at home but then again, I'll make just a roast chicken and mashed potatoes. My wife is a big mashed potato fiend, so
Didn't Jo- didn't
I go ahead.
didn't Joho stir pesto into the risotto, the black
He did,
risotto?
yeah. Pesto.
Yeah.
We have basil growing in the window. We got a grow light above our kitchen window.
Yeah.
I just made a basil puree. I didn't put pine nuts, but then nice palm full of Parmesan Reggiano and some basil and garlic, obviously, and shallot, and then a little of the seasoned breadcrumbs on top. It was pretty, and in Spain, seafood and ham go well together,
Yeah. The dish that I think I've told you, the dish that Joho made for Kathy and I the very first time we went to Maxime's, and he had just started there, and
Right.
he didn't speak any English at the time, but he
Right.
made
I know.
like 12, no, maybe it was 6 quail eggs sunny side up, and wherever there was white was caviar when he
Caviar, yeah,
served it.
yeah.
I was like,
I had it, yeah.
unbelievable dish.
And he did
Yeah.
a dish there that I kind of made my own over the years, was a snail ravioli, little tiny. I don't know if you ever saw the little ravioli tray that are little tiny squares.
Yeah.
And you roll a little pin over, and it's
Yeah.
basically a duxella mushroom and snail inside with,
Yeah.
like a garlic. And I mean, the food was brilliant at Maxine's. And that's where I first met him. And you're right. When I started Everest 1987, he didn't speak much English, but he's learned
No.
it pretty well.
Oh yeah.
He's done okay.
So that's a home meal, is the little quail eggs with the caviar instead of the white?
That was just an appetizer. That's just getting things rolling with some champagne.
Yeah.
So Tony, what do you cook at home at this point?
Well, now that we moved to New York and our apartment is about a quarter of the size it was, we don't cook quite as much, but my favorite thing to cook is some broccoli rabe with garlic and chilies and a couple grilled pork chops or broiled pork chops or chicken breasts. But also taking from my grandmother, who was from Calabria, where she would take pork neck bones and brown them in olive oil. Very small amount of garlic. Another thing, chefs use way too much garlic in this country. Like, why do
Guilty
you?
as charged.
I mean, one garlic clove is fine. Do you need 40? I don't know, but
With chicken, you do. If you're going to make 40
uh,
clove garlic, 40 clove chicken.
but how do you know 37 wasn't the right number? It's
Well,
like you're just going for numbers, and anyway. So taking pork neck bones and browning them in olive oil, a little bit of garlic, and then covering them with a passato, a tomato puree, and just letting that cook all afternoon, and then serving it with pasta. She usually did something, something dried pasta, and then just gnawing on the neck bones when you were done. It was like that to me is my childhood. That dish right there.
now was it pasta or noodles, Tony?
We don't use the N word, John.
And Tony thinks the Italians invented pasta, even though the Chinese were making it before the Italians walked on 2 legs.
I think
Oh,
you're
boy.
probably misinformed, John. But
Okay. Misinformation, I guess. Yeah.
So I
I'm
have a
reading it.
remember when from Joel Smith. He said, Tony, you mentioned Spiaggia being noted for having an all-Italian wine list, but I also fondly remember your original sommelier, Henry Bishop, willing to step out of the mold and feature little-known but absolutely wonderful wines. And I remember his eye wink at a Virginia vineyard he revered, whose
Right.
wine he thought was at such a level he priced the bottle at 1 million.
yeah,
Wasn't that
that's
his
Henry.
brother's winery?
No, his brother was in California. This took place. This vineyard is around Monticello, around where Thomas Jefferson. I can't think of the name of the vineyard, but yeah, he did that. That's crazy. I mean, he was unbelievable. I learned so much about wine from this guy. I mean, so much. And yeah, what was the other part of the question?
Well, it wasn't really a question. It was more of a, I would say, a remember when moment.
So here's another Henry Bishop wine story. So he heard that Madonna's father was making wine in northern Michigan or wherever, somewhere in Michigan, and using Italian grapes. Buying grapes from California, Pinot Grigio and Nebbiolo, and I forget what else. So Henry drives up and buys cases of Mr. Ciccone's wine, and he brings it back to Spiaggia, puts it on the list, and about a week later, Madonna walks in or has a reservation, comes in, And she sits down. The first thing she says, "I'd like to meet Henry." So Madonna was a big Henry fan, as well as her father. But so your stories are correct, and there's so many Henry stories. This call could last a few more hours, but yeah, that was. But I like that. I like this. I like the story that Joel Smith brought up too. It's a great story about the Virginia wines.
Well, here's a closing. I think a good closing is more of a statement again. But that's funny, John, because he was talking about the cuts of meat, the beef, not just going with the standard cuts, but the different ones. And he's been pan cooking a Terrace Major or Terrace Maher, whatever,
Yeah,
steak from
there's Major.
Flagel family for dinner as I listened to you guys.
Right? Yeah, there's
So he
Major's another
practices
one.
what you preach.
Yeah, that's
I
good.
love it.
Good,
I love it.
cut.
Well,
Well,
Scott, I think I'm turning it over to you.
Well, all I can say is thank you two so much for sharing the perspective of Chicago dining. You two are a perspective of Chicago dining, and it was delicious listening to the two of you talk and in your remembrances and the poignant and savory things that you had to say. So thank you so much. It's an honor to have both of you, and can continue doing what you're doing. We all benefit from it. Take care.
thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
And somebody just said this was not only informative, but a lot of fun.
Yes.
Indeed,
Yeah,
it
That's
was.
right.
We had to behave a little bit because normally it's a little more raucous, but I think we did okay.
But you said you wanted to be respectable for your family.
Yeah,
That's right.
of course.
So
You
it's
did.
not like I told you not to.
Right, throw them under the bus about ranch dressing, but that's okay. I'll hear about it later.
Tell Chris I'm sorry. I still love her.
That's okay. I'm with you. I think it's the most horrible thing in the culinary world, if you could call it culinary.
But by the way, there's a restaurant in St. Louis that features ranch dressing.
Yeah. Well, good for them. I wish them all the best. Well, thank you. I appreciate it,
Thanks.
Catherine and Scott. Thank you so much. And
Thank
Anthony,
you.
we'll catch up soon, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Good.
Love
Bye,
you, man.
guys.
Good night.
Ciao.